Hello there and welcome to this landscape artwork walkthrough. If you're new here, my name is Shay and I'm an artist predominantly working with soft pastels. In this video, I'll take you through start to finish for this lovely relaxing art study. So if you're interested in soft pastels and would like to know how you could create realistic and peaceful scenery pieces like the one you see here, stick around and find out some of my favourite methods and techniques to use. All skill levels are welcome, and if you have any questions throughout, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so the first step for the whole process is to get the base layering down, and this is where I take my soft pastel sticks. I mainly use Shimike and Unison Color, and here you can see in this initial stage I'm just blocking in those basic shapes and colors. And now I'm not going to have every specific unique color that I can see in the reference image, but what I can do is just use the blendability of pastels to my advantage and just mix and combine certain colors together to achieve the exact tones and values that I see in the reference image. But as I said, this is just an initial blocking in stage, so I don't have to be super accurate. I just really want to get as much of the relevant colors and tones in a particular area that I can see, and then I can build upon this first initial layer moving forward once I've blended everything out. So to add in this initial base color layer, I'm really not pressing too hard at all because I don't want to fill in the tooth of the pastel matte paper with too much pigment. And this is really important for later on when we start to add pencil details in with our soft pastel pencils. Because if we deposit too much pastel down now, it's going to be really hard to add any pencil details on top. So you can see here that some of the paper is slightly showing through, and that is what we want, because then when we come to blend out in a second, we can push all of that pastel around to cover the paper and everything will be smoothed out. So mainly what you don't want to do in this base layering stage is deposit too much pastel. Like I said, you just want to get those basic colors and shapes in place, and then we can build upon that and refine it moving forward. So once that initial color base layer is in place, I can then take my soft sponge tool and start to blend all of the pigment out. So again, I'll be using a light pressure with this sponge, and I'll just keep going over the different areas and sections to blend them out and create a smooth, even layer of pigment. So as well as blending out the pastel in the particular areas, I'm also using this sponge to push and transfer some of those pigments where I need them to be. This is again just building up on that initial layer and just refining the pigments into their correct placements and locations within the artwork. So when I'm using this sponge tool to blend out my pastel pigment, I'm making sure to stay in the same or similar color group because my sponge will transfer any pigments which are embedded in it. So for example, here you can see that I'm working on this green and brown area. So I can then move my sponge over to another area which has the same greeny brown colors and start to blend that out as well. Because if I just took this sponge and then went straight to a brown or yellow area, for example, it would then get contaminated with the greeny brown colors which I have embedded in my sponge. So in order to keep my colors clean and to stop things from muddying up from the unwanted transferring of colors on the sponge, I make sure to stick to the same or similar color groups. But if I'm ready to move on, what I can then do is take a scrap piece of pastel matte board. I can then grab one of my pastel sticks and deposit quite a lot on the scrap paper. Then I'll take my sponge and just blend all of that new pigment out. So that is the pigment that's now embedded into the sponge, and then I can take this sponge to a new area without worry of contaminating it with incorrect colors. And after creating many soft pastel artworks, I have found that this is a really useful and important method to make sure that my colors are correct and precise throughout, because if I start blending randomly and transferring colors all over the place into the wrong sections and areas, then I'm just going to get a really muddy mess and I'm not going to have that refined colors and tones that I need for my realistic artwork. So it's just all about really being careful and taking the time so that you can have the most correct and clean colors in an area. Okay, so the initial layer is all blended out, and now I can just go on top and start to refine things a bit more. So here for the sky, I've again just done the same. I've put the same pigments down with my soft pastel sticks and I'm just blending it out again. And this layer on top is just going to add a bit more pigment and cover the paper a bit more, add a bit more saturation as well. And you can see now that I'm starting to blend this out and we have those two layers working together, it's starting to look a lot more smooth and also more dynamic as well. So for a smooth even finish such as this sky where you can see there isn't much definition and we have the combining of the lighter yellowy and peachy pigments in with that blue color. So to achieve this, I'm really making sure to only apply a very light pressure with my sponge, and I'm just going over the same area multiple times. So for combining and mixing different sections like this where the colors are quite different, it's just important that you really take your time and try not to rush any area so that you can achieve that smooth, soft blend. Also, the full 2-hour real-time video for this drawing in particular is now live on my Patreon channel. So if you think you would benefit from watching any of these steps in real time, then feel free to check the link out in the description where you can find my Patreon, which has this real-time video and many other lessons available right now. So now I'm just continuing to transfer over some of that lighter pigment into the sky area, because you can see on the reference that this is a clouded area where some of the clouds are just catching that sunlight a little bit more. And I'm just using this transfer for a more subtle method. But now I'm going to take that same lighter pigment, but use the soft pastel stick directly onto my artwork. And I'm going to put it in those lightest areas. And then once the pigment's in place, I can again take my sponge and just blend that out and incorporate it with what's already there. I'll also be using my fingers to blend some of the pastel out, and this just gives more of a blur effect, whereas the sponge would transfer and push the pastel around. Using my fingers instead with this disposable glove just gives more of a softer blurry appearance. It doesn't really push the pastel around, which is useful for some things such as this. So now it's just about building up from this initial color base layer. And so just like I did with the sky, I'm also going to start refining some of the other sections. So here for those rolling hills that we can see in the background, you can see on the reference, they are a mixture of different yellow shades. So what I'm going to do is take some of the yellowy pigments I have, which are similar to what I can see in the reference image. I'm going to plot them on the scrap piece of pastel mat board and then just transfer them over with my sponge to refine and slightly color correct the colors and tones that I can see in the area. And then I can do this same transferring method with all of the sections in this artwork. And so here I'm now moving to a different section with green colors. So I can again use that same method of applying different green pigments to the scrap paper and then picking those up with my soft sponge tool and then applying those to the areas of my artwork that these refined colors and tones need to be. And I can then just blend this out and incorporate it with the base color layer, which is already there. And here you can see with some lighter yellowy greens on top of the base layer, which is already here, I'm starting to pick out where some of the light is hitting for the mountains here. So I'm starting to build up that texture and we're starting to see that mountain structure appear. So again, as I said at the start of the video, I'm using the blendability of pastels to my advantage. So I'm not going to have every specific color which I need for this artwork, but what I can do is mix and combine different colors together to achieve those exact tones that I'm looking for. And using this scrap paper method is a really useful way to figure out these specific colors beforehand, so that you're confident in what you then apply to your artwork. And again, this just helps to make sure that your colors don't get modified so that they're not too dirty looking, which is what can happen with soft pastels if you accidentally put in and transfer over the wrong colors time and time again. So I like to think of the scrap paper transfer method as just a fail-safe way for refining colors. It's also important to think about those subtle colours which are not so obvious. So for example, here at the bottom half of the drawing, you can see the landscape is generally quite brown in colour, but within the shadows here behind this mountain, you can see mixed in with the brown colours, there are also hints of green. So what I can do is just work upon the base layer that we have and then mix some brown and green pigments on the scrap paper and just apply this to the artwork. And this is allowing me to achieve something very close to what I see in the reference image. Okay, so I have the blurry base layer of color and I have all of the areas and sections mainly mapped out. So now all we need is our details on top. So I can switch my soft pastel sticks and sponge for pastel pencils and work on top of what we've already done and start to refine all of the different areas even further. So just like with the soft pastel sticks, I can also use the blendability of pastel pencils to my advantage and mix and combine different colors together to achieve those exact tones that I'm looking for. And so when I'm using my pencils, I'm mainly using a light pressure throughout. And I'm typically holding my pencil a bit further back, which allows me to only use a light pressure. And it also helps me to see more of what's going on, what I'm actually drawing in place. So to draw these mountains in place and to get that strong sense of depth, we have to really study and think about the lighting so you can see each mountain step. So say that there's 3 rolling hills here. You can see at the top of each hill section, it's darker at the top and then becomes lighter as we come down the section. I'll be replicating these smooth transitions with my pencils, so being sure to shade in a way which creates a soft, even finish. And then I can also add some of the texture on top, which we can see mainly in this hill coming down towards us. So as these hills are still far in the distance, there isn't going to be much detail and definition for these elements. And this is going to create a really strong sense of depth when we now start to draw in the more detailed hill which is in front. And you'll slowly start to see that strong sense of depth of field where the background is blurry and then the foreground is sharp and comes into focus. So now that we're coming closer into the foreground and things are coming closer to the camera and the viewer, we can really start to pick out all of that rich detail and definition that we can see within the landscape here. So with my pastel pencils, I'm drawing on top of the base layer both darker and lighter colors. So you can see we have those darker brown textures which start at the bottom of the hill and then work their way up. And then we also have dips and grooves within the landscape and you can see the light hitting a bit more. So we have lighter and darker sections all throughout, and replicating this with our pastel pencils is going to start to build up the structure that we can see in the reference image. So you can see these sort of stone textures and colours poking through the cliffside here, and for that I'm using the Caran d'Ache pencil, and this is because the Caran d'Ache pastel pencils in particular are very opaque. So they are a very soft brand of pastel pencil which are perfect for any final details. So you can see that the small body of water here has some slight difference in values where we can see some shadows and some of the water, especially on the right side, just catching some of that sunlight there. So I can just take some different pencils, some greys and a white, and I can just very lightly shade on top to create some of these tonal and value differences. And then building up some of the texture for the surrounding areas, I can take a black and just very lightly shade in all these particular sections which you can see are shadowed and darker. I'll then use some slightly lighter pencils, maybe some greens, for some of the highlights in the surrounding areas, and you can see slowly but surely using both the darker and the lighter colours, we're starting to build up that texture and structure that we can see within the landscape here. Would you like to gain a much more in-depth insight into my artistic process? Well, my Patreon channel offers a wide range of exclusive tutorials and real-time lessons for creating realistic artworks. There are beginner-friendly lessons for soft pastels, graphite and oil paint with a wide range of subject matter. I often get asked about how I create my artworks. Patreon is where I share all of my favourite and must-know art tips from my years of experience. With each tutorial, you will learn my go-to methods and techniques for both the materials and tools. Our time is valuable, so I've made sure that my lessons are efficient and straight to the point so that you can quickly learn and take away the skills and knowledge that you need to know for any artworks that you wish to create. Once subscribed, you instantly unlock access to all of the lessons available on my Patreon to start learning from straight away. Subscriptions are monthly with no contract, so you can cancel at any time. To find out more, feel free to visit the link to my Patreon in this video's description. If you would also like to take a look at the lesson catalogue before joining, I have a dedicated page on my website showcasing each video, which will also be linked below. So we've gone from a smooth and soft base layer, and we're now slowly but surely starting to build up details on top of that layer, which is allowing our artwork to closer resemble what we can see in the reference image. And this two-step process of creating the base layer and then adding the details on top is pretty much what I do for any soft pastel artwork, whether it's a landscape or a portrait or a seascape. I'll always do a soft color base layer first and then add the pencil details on top afterwards. And after drawing many portraits where you have to be really careful and precise with the details, as any little mistake is instantly obvious, it's quite nice and refreshing to draw landscapes and seascapes, because even if you make a little mistake, or if something's not quite as you see it in the reference image, it's not really going to be noticeable. So you can have a bit more freedom with it and not feel too pressured to match the reference photo exactly as you see it. So I think if any part of your drawing is just a little bit off compared to the reference image, I wouldn't worry about it at all, and it's also nice to put something that's unique out there into the world anyway. So as you can see with this area, I'm just gradually going through with my pastel pencils, both with different shades of browns and greens, and also some lighter and darker greys, and I'm just building up that texture that I see on this rock face here. And by using a light pressure, I can just slowly build up all of those little details that we see in the area, depending on how I hold my pencil, so if I hold it close to the tip or further back, and also by using varying levels of pressure. This is going to help me to draw in different textures and features for the landscape. So one of my favorite things about pastel pencils is how you also have that added control with the pressure, because the harder you press, the more opaque your marks will be, and the lighter you press, the more subtle things will be. So this is a nice little benefit to pastels that you get over other medias such as color pencil or painting, which doesn't have this added benefit. To finish off the piece here, I'm just going to further refine this section with my pencils, adding in both some of those darker areas and lighter areas. Throughout this artwork, I'm not necessarily thinking about what I'm drawing in these small elements. I'm just picking out the basic shapes and colors that I see in the reference image. And hopefully you can see by focusing on the particular values and also all of the different colors and structure elements within a particular area, you can use your pastel pencils to slowly build up from that soft base layer into something which looks like a detailed landscape artwork. So anyway, here is the finished landscape study. I really hope you enjoyed watching and were able to take away a few tips for your own landscape pieces. If you would like to watch the full uninterrupted real-time process video for this drawing, it's available now on my Patreon with many other lessons. The link for that is in the description. Before you go, why not grab my free soft pastel and pastel pencil beginner guide, which is jam-packed with useful info. Hundreds of students have already grabbed their copy, so I hope it can help you out too.